the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network presents Vatican Insider with Joan Lewis. Each week, Joan brings you news from inside the Vatican and the Church around the world, as well as interviews and answers to your questions. Now, here's the host of Vatican Insider, Joan Lewis.
Welcome to Vatican Insider on the weekend after Ferragosto, the Italian name once associated with pagan games in the month of August, but now referring to the solemnity of the Assumption. It also refers to the usually quite long August period of holidays. In fact, the lazy, hazy days of Ferragosto is the title of the special that will appear in what is normally the interview segment. This is August like you've never ever imagined it. I did this special a couple of years ago, and when speaking of the Assumption, mentioned it was on a Monday. Well, this year, of course, this week, the feast fell on a Thursday. In any case, I think you'll be fascinated by August in Italy. Well, first, some news headlines. August 14, 15, and 16 are holidays for Vatican and Roman Curia employees. For that reason, there was no general audience on Wednesday, but the Pope did recite the Angelus on the 15th. Sunday, August 11th, Pope Francis prayed the noon Angelus with pilgrims in St. Peter's Square, and he reflected on the day's gospel. He noted that Jesus' contemporaries refused to believe his word that he had come down from heaven. Since they knew his father and mother, as well as his profession as a carpenter, they doubted that God could manifest himself in such a familiar, ordinary way. They were obstructed in their faith, said the Pope, by their preconception of his humble origins and the presumption, therefore, that they have nothing to learn from him. Pope Francis noted how damaging prejudices and closure of the heart can be for a person's growth. He warned the same closure can happen to us when we pray only to find confirmation of our own convictions and judgments. True faith and prayer open the mind and the heart. They do not close them. When you find a person who is closed in mind and prayer, their faith and prayer are not true. After reciting the Angelus, Francis said, "Let us renew our intense prayer for peace, especially in martyred Ukraine, the Middle East, Palestine, Israel, Sudan, and Myanmar." He also recalled the anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II, and he invited everyone to pray for victims of those events and of all wars. He then asked for prayers for victims of a plane crash in Brazil's Sao Paulo state on Friday that killed all 61 people aboard. Monday, August 12th, Pope Francis met with leaders of 4 religious congregations who are holding their general chapters in Rome: the Dominican Missionary Sisters of St. Sixtus, the Sisters of the Society of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the Sisters of the Presentation of Mary Most Holy in the Temple, and the Society of Divine Vocations. He began with a reflection on the significance of discernment, saying it is essential for every religious congregation and individual. He also highlighted the joy that comes from making good decisions, saying that making a good decision, a right decision, brings us much joy. Turning to the topic of formation, Pope Francis acknowledged that this is a common and shared mission among religious congregations. Religious life is a path of growth in holiness that embraces the whole of existence, with perseverance in prayer, sacramental life, and the relationship with Christ. Lastly, Francis described the foundational role of charity in the mission of these religious congregations. Also August 12th, Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Parolin and the new president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, discussed issues of common interest during a telephone call, with Cardinal Parolin expressing the Holy See's deep concern over the risk of a widening of the war in the Middle East. Cardinal Parolin congratulated the new president on the start of his term of office, and he said they discussed issues of common interest. He expressed the Holy See's deep concern over what is happening in the Middle East, reiterating the need to avoid, in any way possible, the widening of the very serious conflict underway and preferring instead every effort for dialogue, negotiation, and peace. Thursday, August 15th. During his Angelus address on the solemnity of the Assumption, Pope Francis said, "We should not imagine Mary as a motionless wax statue." He said instead, in her, we can see a sister with worn-out sandals and with so much fatigue, before she could later conclude her journey in the glory of heaven. In this way, he reiterated, the Holy Virgin is the one who precedes us on the path, reminding all of us that our life is also a continuous journey towards final union with the Lord. Now, you might remember that on November 1st, 1950, Pope Pius XII declared the Blessed Mother's Assumption into heaven as dogma in his apostolic constitution, Munificentimus Deus. And this asserted that the Blessed Virgin Mary, quote, by an entirely unique privilege, completely overcame sin by her immaculate conception, unquote, and as a result, quote, she was not subject to the law of remaining in the corruption of the grave, and she did not have to wait until the end of time for the redemption of her body, end quote. Pius went on to infallibly declare that, quote, the Immaculate Mother of God, the ever-Virgin Mary, having completed the course of her earthly life, was assumed body and soul into heavenly glory. Following the Thursday recitation of the Angelus, Pope Francis turned his thoughts to the suffering in so many parts of the world due to conflicts and wars, recalling the people of Ukraine, the Middle East, Palestine, Israel, Sudan, and Myanmar. He prayed that Mary, Queen of Peace, whom we contemplate today in the glory of paradise, may obtain for all consolation and a future of serenity and harmony. The Pope prayed in particular for the suffering people of Gaza, where the humanitarian crisis has reached catastrophic levels. He appealed for a ceasefire on all fronts, for the release of hostages, and for aid to the exhausted population. He also encouraged every effort to avoid any escalation in the conflict and that paths of negotiation be pursued so this tragedy can be stopped. He punctuated his remarks again, reminding everyone that war always marks a defeat. Friday, August 16th. For 10 years, Catholics have gathered in the Italian city of Rimini on the Adriatic on the 20th day of every month in the city's main square to pray the Rosary for peace. To mark that anniversary, Pope Francis sent a message, released on Friday, to the Nazareth Committee for Persecuted Christians, which organizes the monthly Rosary that has spread to many cities around the globe. In his message, the Pope thanked the Nazareth Committee for their attention towards brothers and sisters living in lands affected by terrible conflicts. Thank you for your witness to kind charity, solidarity, and especially for your union with the suffering of the populations wounded by injustice, oppression, hatred, and greed. Over the past 10 years, the Nazareth Initiative has collected tens of thousands of euros, which it has sent to assist hundreds of vulnerable families, particularly in Syria and Iraq. Well, those are the week's news highlights, but stay right here, grab a tall, cool drink, and come with me to visit the lazy, hazy days of Ferragosto and August in Italy. You'll enjoy a few laughs for sure. Welcome to the Q&A. Today's question concerns when and where to genuflect. In some churches, says the questioner, it is difficult to know when and where to genuflect. For example, when altar servers pass behind the freestanding altar and the tabernacle is located at the back of the sanctuary, should they file to the altar or genuflect to the tabernacle? When you hear the answers, you will realize how few people know what to do, and sometimes that's the priest. The answer is from the Liturgical Question Box by Bishop Peter J. Elliott. He writes, the example you provide can easily be resolved in the light of the general law, that is to say, the general instruction of the Roman Missal, number 233. It's clear that the Eucharist takes precedence over the altar, therefore the server genuflects to our Lord in the tabernacle. However, if he passes behind the altar after the consecration, he genuflects to the Eucharist on the altar. Now, regarding a liturgical procession, if it's moving from the sacristy to the sanctuary and passes the Blessed Sacrament chapel, no reverence is made to the Blessed Sacrament. But individual persons passing the chapel should genuflect. If the chapel is located to one side of the altar, but in or close to the sanctuary, it would suffice that the clergy and servers only genuflect toward the tabernacle on arriving and when leaving the sanctuary for a Mass or other celebration. This information is very important for those who carry out liturgical ministries. Thus, the servers and lectors, choir, cantors, musicians, ushers, sacristans, and so forth. Lectors and cantors who come from the body of the church to the ambo or a lectern in the sanctuary need to be reminded they are only permitted to substitute a bow for the genuflection if they have some disability. Children in particular need to be taught the meaning of genuflecting and how to do it well.
Hi, this is Mike Aquilina with a few words about St. Irenaeus. It's only recently that Pope Francis has declared him to be a doctor of the Church, and this is unusual because he's been dead for many centuries, almost 2 millennia. But I think he's a man for our time because he's teaching us to think, to have an educated faith, to know the reasons for what we believe, and then present those to a skeptical world.
Carry the faith wherever you go. Watch your favorite EWTN show, series, or special, or listen to your favorite EWTN radio program at any time, day or night. EWTN On Demand brings all your favorites instantly. Download the EWTN app at EWTNapps.com today.
Toddlers are utterly free, maybe too free. In the quiet moments after communion the other day, my 3-year-old repeatedly shouted, "I tooted." They don't care what people think of them. They actually don't really worry about anything. Who's going to pay the bills? Where's my next meal going to come from? They get in their car seats without asking, where are we going? They fall asleep in those car seats and wake up somewhere else and never wonder, what happened last night? That's because they know they have a father and a mother who love them and look out for them. So they're free to enjoy the ride. As we get older, we have responsibilities and stresses that pile up on us. But it's important to remember that we still have a Heavenly Father who loves us, and no matter how crazy things get, He's looking out for us. And from the eternal perspective, everything's going to be fine. You know what that means? It means we can enjoy the ride. This is Chris Stefanik from RealLifeCatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Vatican Insider. Here's Joan Lewis.
Welcome to Vatican Insider. It's August, usually a hot month in the Northern Hemisphere, and it even seems like the tropics in so many parts of the world this summer. It's been a really brutal summer in Europe for heat waves, droughts, rivers drying up, and attempts by governments to ration water and so on. Today I want to look at August in Italy on this special I've prepared that I call the lazy, hazy summer days of Ferragosto. On Monday in Italy, we celebrate the biggest holiday of the summer season, Ferragosto, the name Italians give to the August 15th solemnity of the Assumption. Ferragosto refers to the Feriae Augusti, meaning the holidays of August. These appear to have originated in 18 BC, when the Roman Emperor Augustus declared that the entire month of August would be dedicated to the Feriae, a series of festivals and celebrations, the most important of which fell on the 13th and was dedicated to the goddess Diana. Though the term Ferragosto is pagan in origin, in Italy it refers to the midsummer holidays, but is interchangeable with the feast of the Assunta, the Assumption, strictly a religious celebration. There has been a constant tradition in the Church that Mary was assumed into heaven, and as early as the 5th century, this feast was celebrated in Syria, spreading to other parts of the world over the centuries. In the 12th century, this feast was celebrated in the city of Rome and in France. From the 13th century onwards, this was a certain tenet of faith, and in 1950, Pope Pius XII declared this dogma infallibly an ex cathedra. The pace of life is much slower in Rome in July and August, especially August, and you'll see a lot of chiuso per ferie, closed for vacation signs, posted on the shutters of stores, pharmacies, florists, some restaurants and coffee bars, newsstands, tobacconists, hardware stores, movie theaters, and small neighborhood food markets known as alimentari. The phones of friends, including many who work in the Roman Curia, often ring empty. The peace and quiet of Rome, due to the shuttered stores and the greatly reduced traffic, is, to put it simply, marvelous. It seems like you could shoot a cannon down the middle of some of the city's main streets and not hit a thing. The souvenir stores and mini-markets that dot every street in Rome will be open for business as usual. The markets open about 7 in the morning and they close about midnight. Life is extra quiet in the Vatican as well. When the Pope is away on vacation, or in the case of Pope Francis, on a reduced work schedule or staycation, this mini-state is almost deserted. The Vatican stores, pharmacy, and medical center, however, all have reduced hours because so many employees are away on prolonged vacations. Vacations are quite generous in the summer, at Christmas, and at Easter for employees of Vatican City State or the Roman Curia. Employees who live outside of Italy receive an added 3 days of vacation for travel time to the month-long vacation, and those who live outside of continental Europe receive 5 additional travel days. These vacations usually compensate for working 6 days a week the rest of the year, which makes weekend travel generally impossible. Except for the Angelus, there are no public and few private audiences when the Pope is on vacation. Curial activity slows down in the summer and stops completely on August 14, 15, and 16, all of which are holidays. Only the press office and Secretariat of State are open for business, and only with a skeletal staff. However, the last few years have been a vast improvement on the early years I lived in Italy, especially when there were very few supermarkets. Once upon a time, Italians bought most of their food at 3 places: the local alimentari, the neighborhood butcher, and the local fruit and vegetable store. Each store was assigned a letter, either A or B, for summer vacations. When A stores closed, B stores could not, and vice versa. This was to avoid all stores in one neighborhood closing at the same time, forcing people to go longer distances for food. Now, of course, we have supermarkets. I can also remember when the local newspapers actually published the names of the few doctors, including specialists, who were available in Rome at vacation time, as well as a list of the few pharmacies that would be open in a given period. Years ago, many coffee bars and restaurants closed for a month in the summer, especially because so few had air conditioning. Since the historically hot and brutal summer of 2003, 4 non-stop months of record heat, ending in mid-September, more and more stores, bars, and restaurants have installed air conditioning. Over 10,000 people died in France that summer, and approximately 1,000 died in Italy. By law, restaurants and bars must close 1 day a week, and that day is always posted outside the entrance or on the shutter. Some overlook this law, while others ask special permission to remain open 7 days. For example, if a restaurant has its weekly closing on Monday, but Monday of a given year is Christmas or Ferragosto, the owner would ask permission from the proper authorities to open that day, or they might simply open without the proper permission. Until the summer of 2013, popes generally spent all or much of the summer period at Castel Gandolfo. St. John Paul and Benedict XVI often spent some time in July in northern Italy at a vacation home belonging to a diocese or diocesan seminary. Long walks in the woods, picnics, some downtime for reading, and in the case of Benedict, some quiet time to play the piano, and cooler temperatures marked those periods. You really have to spend an August in Rome, especially just before and after Ferragosto, to understand the impact, how life here at that time of the year is totally different from anything we'd know or have experienced in the U.S., how a major city almost becomes a ghost city. Aside from the heat that can take your breath away, I love August in Rome. The streets are almost empty. Fewer cars means fewer horns honking, and at times it seems like there are even fewer ambulances with sirens blasting away. I love that there are fewer motorbikes. I've never had a car here. I walk, take a bus, or when needed, hail a taxi. As far as buses go in August, there are a lot more seats available. Now, I want to turn to an amusing look at Ferragosto, courtesy of Bob Moynihan of Inside the Vatican magazine. I saw a post of his a few years ago that I felt depicted summer in Rome, especially the hot and heady dog days of summer, with a bullseye precision. With Bob's kind permission, I offer you this page from his journal. In these days in Rome, the heat is infernal, and the Italians are saying so. A headline here reads, in translation, "Lucifer's not in a hurry. Italy is an inferno." The report goes on. Lucifer isn't in a hurry to take a vacation. He will remain to keep us company with the 2 tongues of flame at least until the end of the week. And there's also this. On August 15th, infernal temperatures are expected. So it seems likely this will continue a bit longer. Bob continues. Today at midday in Rome it was 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. There was hardly a flicker of a breeze, perhaps 2 miles an hour every so often. And though it seems quite dry for Rome, the humidity here is still about 25%. That's the problem with Rome. Not so much the heat, but the humidity, often much higher than 25%. In fact, one report says humidity and other factors are making it feel much hotter with the so-called, quote, perceived temperature in Campania, the region around Naples. This was estimated at a broiling 55 degrees Celsius or 131 Fahrenheit. That's what it says, 131 degrees. Of course, that's just perceived temperature, but it's still pretty hot if you are the perceiver. Bob continues, "It's so hot that you feel like you're inside a pizza oven when you're out in the sun. It's so hot that as you walk, you look right and left for any shady spot, under a colonnade, by the walls of a building, under cafe awnings, anywhere there's a bit of shade rather than stay in the sunlight. Anything for a bit of relief from the sun's pounding bright rays. Still, there are pilgrims. God bless them, many of them seemingly Chinese, gathering by the doors of the Vatican museums, walking up the long walls, braving the heat of the day in order to see the treasures. But many old people and shut-ins are in trouble. In Milan, there's been a spike in calls from old people, as thousands have called for medical assistance. Animals and crops are also in trouble. Cows are producing 20% less milk, and Italy's olive and grape harvest this fall are expected to be down by a similar amount due to the heat and dryness. The water level in Lake Garda in the north is almost 1/3 below capacity. Now again, that was a couple years ago, but Bob goes on to present something from Patrick Brown, a writer for the local.it website, who has written an account of how the ancient Romans dealt with the heat. Brown writes that the Romans were no strangers to the summer heat. In fact, the modern term, the dog days of summer, actually comes from the Latin dies canicula, the Roman term used to describe the stuffy, hot period of weather between July and mid-August. The name comes from the fact that Sirius, the dog star, rises with the sun at this time of year. Romans thought this was the reason for the increase in temperature. While they may not have been experts in meteorology, the Romans did know a few practical ways of coping in a heat wave. So what advice can they give us? And Patrick Brown goes on with 5 suggestions. 1. Go to the frigidarium. The frigidarium was a large cold pool at the Roman baths where Romans went to cool down. The waters of the frigidarium were kept chilly in the summer months thanks to the addition of snow and ice that had been imported from the Alps. Second idea, leave work early. When in Rome, leave work early. The ancient Romans did not do a 9-to-5 day. In fact, the average Roman only had a 6-hour workday, toiling from sunrise until noon. This stopped them from having to labor during the hottest part of the day, and it left them with plenty of time to go and sit in the frigidarium with their friends. Third suggestion, eat snow. Granita, a delicious way to keep cool. Before gelato was invented, Romans, hoping for a cool snack, had to use what nature offered them. While the rich patricians and Roman nobility would often have huge stores of imported snow at home to keep them cool, citizens had to visit the snow shop. There, mountain ice was kept in underground pits and could sell for more money than wine. Fourth idea, turn on the air conditioning. Air conditioning in ancient Rome? Yep. The Romans were master architects, and they kept their homes cool during the summer months by employing a series of architectural tricks that provided ancient forms of air conditioning. For example, some rich residents pumped cold water through the walls of their home to freshen their dwellings during the summer months. Obviously, this was only for a select few, and the average Roman home, the insulae, were probably very stuffy indeed. Final suggestion. Many wealthy Romans escaped the heat of the summer months by going to their country houses in the hills outside Rome. With its restricted airflow and masses of heat-storing marble, ancient Rome was a furnace in summer, and the city's wealthy patricians were fully aware of what is known today as, quote, the urban heat island effect. Urban centers are, in fact, 1 to 3 degrees Celsius hotter during the day than the surrounding countryside, while at night the difference can be as much as 12 degrees Celsius. Lower, of course. Now that's the difference between a good night's sleep and a sweaty night spent tossing and turning. Well, I've given you just a look at the lazy, hazy days of Ferragosto in Rome. Now you know when to come to Rome for a visit, or perhaps when not to come to the Eternal City. In any case, stay cool.
For more information on these stories, or to check out Joan's blog and to ask her a question, go to EWTN.com. That's EWTN.com. Thanks for listening to Vatican Insider on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.